Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсаас Монгол улсад суух онц бөгөөд бүрэн эрхт элчин сайд ноён Стефан Дуппел оролцож байна.
Стефан Дуппел холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсаас Монгол улсад суух онц бөгөөд бүрэн эрхт элчин сайд. Ноён Стефан Дуппел хууль эрх зүйч мэргэжлээр суралцсан ба албан ёсны хуульчийн болон атишигийн сургалтанд тус хамрагжээ. Тэрээр холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсын гадаад хэргийн яамны зүүн Европын эдийн засгийн харилцааны хэлтэс, хүний эрх, хүмүүнлэгийн тусламжийн хэрэг эрхлэх алба, тус яамны соёлын гадаад бодлого, олон нийтийн харилцаа стратеги төлөвлөлтийн дэд даргаар тус ажиллаж байсан. Ноён Стефан Дуппел Мадрид, Бангкок, Буэнос Айрес дэх холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсын элчин сайдын яамд болон холбооны ерөнхийлөгчийн тамгын газарт ерөнхийлөгч асан доктор Рихард фон Васкерийн ажлын албаны даргын албан тушаалыг хашиж байсан.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
It's a great honor for me to have this second interview with you as ambassador to Mongolia. And 2.5 years ago, we have been talking about, you were just about 6 months or so after Assam arriving in Mongolia. We have been talking about challenges, briefly that time about economic, political, cultural relations. Let's go back to our conversations after 2.5 years before you depart the country for your next assignment in Bolivia, right?
That's, yes.
So how do you find those challenges today after 2.5 years?
Yeah. Well, to tell the truth, I leave the country with quite some dose of optimism. If you really think of where the country stood 2.5 years ago, on the brink of a state default, then you also had, well, 3 governments in relatively short time. So politically it was not so stable as well. Now everything looks much better, and I'm happy that Germany could contribute not only to things like the IMF package, but also to make a lot of projects that we had together prosper in these 2.5 years. That was not so clear in the beginning when money is missing on the Mongolian side, but we managed. Overall, I would say 2 steps forward, 1 step back is the Mongolian tango.
Tango. Okay.
And we will have to live with that, and we have to face these challenges, but we can overcome them.
Hopefully we should learn to dance a bit faster, those tango, or a little bit, 3 steps ahead. Another thing I have observed during this last 2.5 years, we have been talking that time about cultural relations, in particular about the Goethe Institute, where you were responsible for from ministry side in Berlin. So what is done during this 2 years?
I'm very happy that we were able to convert the office of the Goethe Institute that existed into a full-fledged cultural institute. And in fact, it's the only Western cultural institute in Mongolia. And so it's, I think, a big step forward, a big progress.
What is the mission of the institute? What has been done so far?
It turns all around culture and educational exchange. So if you talk of education, of course, it's focused around the German language, introducing it in different schools, etc. If you talk of cultural exchange, you have the probably known by everyone the music lab that is becoming almost a phenomena, because now in Germany they are asking me, how come there are so many excellent Mongolian jazz musicians? Where do they come from? And they come from this cooperation. So all in all, but of course I do other projects too, on theater, on film festival, on etc. etc. If you allow me to be a little bit pathetic, I think it is very important if people of different background, of two different countries that are very far from each other, if they can understand each other, it's because they know what the other one laughs about or cries about, and that's culture. This culture background is needed. If not, we will never fully understand each other.
Exactly.
So I think it's very important, and I want the Institute, and I know they are, to be also very open to cooperation with other, particularly European countries. It shouldn't be purely a German institute. It should be an institute that promotes also European culture.
We have been talking about that, but some 80 years ago, Mongolians, first intelligent Mongolians, were sent to Germany.
Yes.
They came back, the many cultures. Since that, we have a rather close feeling to Germany outside of European countries. And now we were talking about thanks to also GDR cooperation, 3% of the country speaking German. In that sense, what is your take after 2.5 years?
I see a renewed interest. For instance, if you talk about German being taught in schools, we have now 12 schools all over the country, not only in Ulaanbaatar that teach German. The numbers tripled in the past 10 years of students learning it. Of course, you still have the academic exchange. I would especially add to this point our German Mongolian Institute of Technology, because it's a university in Mongolia, but having German and European standards for forming engineers that the country, I think, desperately needs. And it's good that brilliant students do not have to go abroad to study it, but that they have an institute here that has it all.
Indeed, we talked about that time also standard 2.5 years ago, but standard, German standards in many industries, in particular construction, then engineering that you talk about. Do you see any progress in this regard in terms of using or in terms of penetration into the system?
Definitely, there is progress. If you see, if you look at, my personal experience is with making some refurbishments of the embassy, and of course you see material being used and people knowing how to use it that you probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen. And this is why one of our other focuses on education is on vocational training, because I think you have a lot of university studies here, but vocational training is a little lacking behind. It's not modern enough to be ready for the industry 4.0. You need the most modern machines when you educate people, so that then they go to the companies and can start right away. And so we are also in 12 centers for vocational training, and we increased this engagement a lot because I think it's vital for the development of Mongolia.
I also observed more youngsters, young workers were sent to Germany for vocational training in the road construction, forestry, management, and construction itself. So we see certainly the society observes the growing cooperation in that field, in more vocational training, standardization. which is, by the way, more solid basis for further cooperation between two countries, etc. So I hear quite see, and also with your wife also a contribution to cultural relations more towards to that directions, which brings to more understanding in between people was, I think, great events. I have been myself witness it for these 2.5 years. Let's talk about a bit now. Before we go to economic, we want to have some political relations.
Sure.
During these 2.5 years, what kind of high-level visits we had?
Okay, there was, of course, the visit of the Chancellor at the ASEM summit that took place right before I arrived. And I think for me the most important visit was the visit of the Minister of Defense, of Frau von der Leyen, last October, because as we know by now, she will be the new President of the EU Commission. So I think Mongolia will have definitely left a good impression, or I know will have left a good impression on her, and I'm sure that with this background, cooperation with Europe will benefit from this visit.
Certainly we are looking forward, in particular, if there is any, if you may say, what is a new development in between two defense ministries?
Well, we have intensified our cooperation. You know, for 10 years now, Mongolian and German soldiers are fighting side by side in Afghanistan. And with the training provided by the German side, here, they come here twice a year for several weeks. And then they all go together to Afghanistan, and it's really a cooperation that not only works, it's really an excellent example, and both sides highly appreciate it. So we are extending it to other areas, not only Afghanistan, other trainings, etc. And but I also want to mention some other aspect, part of, if you want, a little piece of the mosaic. We also managed to increase the opportunities that Mongolians have, politicians and militaries, to be part of the debates that we have on security policy, namely through the George Marshall Center in Bavaria. And I think it's very important because there you really discuss, all the European, American experts discuss security issues, not only in Europe, but also our views, let's say, on Russia, on China, and so on. And I think it's very important that Mongolia is part of it and understands our views, and we understand their views and their perspective.
Speaking about that part of cooperation, Mongolia is still a democratic society, country where we vote, in general, okay, everything in terms of the human rights, freedom of speech. This country is a free country, and which, compared to our neighbors, still a different country. And we promote the idea of the third neighbor policy, which now well understood around the world and accepted, and yet we have now no need to go more deeper into the hugs to our neighbors. In that sense, we also want to have that, our third neighbor policy. What is your take on that with the current development in this regard?
Well, certainly Mongolia so far has managed very well to find the right balance, and not to fall in the trick of, let's say, having to choose between the neighbors, because you have several neighbors, why not? And you have to have good relations with all of them. And if one of the neighbors tells you you shouldn't, don't listen, because this this will create the tensions, and then it's very hard to get out of it. I think Mongolia so far has done the right thing. And just one point at the moment, it's, let's say, the ongoing debate on whether to become member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Of course, totally up to Mongolia what to decide, and we are not advising in one way or another. And I also think that both options are valid, but I think it's very good to think of it hard and to study it, to analyze it, and not to let's say to decide from one day to the other.
That's what's happening now in the country. I think the country is now looking at the things very in a rational way,
Right.
really to make a serious fundamental search.
Right.
Is it good for the Mongolian people or not?
Right.
For their prosperity,
Right.
for our further strengthening of that right we have.
Absolutely.
And at the end, in this country, the state serves people, not vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that's what really an agenda,
Yeah.
and Mongolia is looking at very thoroughly. In particular, for example, about this Eurasia integration process, where the Eurasian Union in Russia,
Mm-hmm.
where the smaller country and big countries have customer union,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where the goods, labor goes free,
Mm-hmm.
which creates not very competitive advantage for smaller countries,
Right.
because cheaper goods are coming in here.
Right.
So that we look at the Kyrgyzia, for example, Kyrgyzstan, what's exactly happening.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move back to our bilateral relations. Let's go a little bit now deeper into issues which not necessarily makes us that happy.
Mm.
Because it's democracy, we discuss what makes us
Right.
not happy, so
Yeah.
what we will do to make happy.
Yeah.
Trade relations, trade balance, still very negative, right? And investment.
Mm-hmm.
What are challenges in these two fields, please?
Well, generally speaking, yes, the progress there is not as big as I would have wished it to be, and there are a lot of high-level meetings. There is a lot of goodwill on both sides to make progress, but the fact is the numbers are not really impressive. If you talk of trade, and this applies not only to Germany because Mongolia is part of the European preferential system and is not really benefiting as other countries do. And we always wonder why. I mean, why are exports in particular so limited to the European Union? If you look at the number from the German point of view, the trade, I mean, import and export added with Mongolia represents 0.01% of the German trade. So practically nothing.
Why Mongolia is not benefiting from that preferential conditions that Europeans give you for thousands of Mongolian goods
Right.
to have a no import tax to Europe, and Mongolia is not yet using, and not yet every politicians are talking about, and nothing is moving. How do you see what's behind?
Well, on one hand, you have to have, of course, the competitive product that you identify, because there are hundreds of others that are competing with you. And we see, of course, a shining positive example is Kashmir, is Gobi Kashmir that is represented. And I think probably, if you look at the numbers more concretely, it's the biggest part of exports that go to Europe. It comes from one company. Of course, you would need more companies to do the same, and you would also have to diversify a little which products you're exporting.
That industry is in mass, though providing half of the world Kashmir supply.
Right.
This country is producing quite smaller part, though the one company company is big, but for the countries.
Right.
This is something that we are not fixing in spite of all this promises of our politicians. I think it's a matter of making free the price so that the politicians don't like it. So, all right, in terms of trade, such situation. How about the German investment? What kind of challenges they face, if you may say?
To tell the truth, it is probably the most challenging at the moment, at least for us. The two biggest investments, one wind and one solar park, that together have a volume of almost 200 million euros, are both on the brink of default because the Minister of Energy is not honoring the agreements that exist. That's a big issue for the two companies, but of course, moreover, it's a big issue for the future investors that look at this carefully.
When you formulate the word not honoring the contract, well, it sounds very harsh. What do you mean?
Yeah. That there have been agreements being signed and that the conditions of these agreements from the Mongolian side, they want to change them now that the investment is already done or on its way. And also, there is an argument that irritates me a lot, that is, well, these agreements were not signed by me, they were signed by my predecessor. Of course, if you have investments that are meant to last 20 to 30 years, you have to have the confidence that no matter which government is there, sees these agreements as binding.
Unfortunately, that's happening not only with your German investment, but with other investments where the frequent changes of the governments in this country, the honoring the previous commitment is really much missing, and you are the not only ambassador or not only investment who are not happy about that. And I think the current and the next government of Mongolia is to really to consider if we want to have a reliable partner beyond your promise. I mean, I promise one thing today to you, and next day I'm warning and they're coming and changing that. How you can have this trust? So really, this is a matter, and this is the concern also of Mongolian businesses also.
Absolutely.
It is if the government do with the foreign investors, and how about the domestic investors? How they change every day the conditions. Unfortunately, that's the weakest point, by the way, which makes not competitive our product, because the conditions are being changed. Let's talk about future. What is really you see potentially can do be a bit better and bigger picture in between two countries of cooperation?
Well, if I look at our cooperation at the moment, it's really it's extremely comprehensive. It goes from security matters, political consultations, to the economic side, but also a lot of civil society involvement, political foundations. We have development cooperation that is about 450 million in total. So it's very big on the protection of nature or on energy system modernization, etc., etc. So it's easier to say where we're not cooperating. And now, where do we go from here? I think what will still be very important is the cooperation on civil society. A part of political and economic issues, civil society and in combination with rule of law, judicial reforms, I think is an important task. Let me pick one example now that we're here, that you're in front of me, the media sector. We doubled our budget for media cooperation through the Deutsche Welle. More than anything on the professionalism of journalism. Mongolia has a free press, but I'm not always impressed by the quality. I must acknowledge, and we have a shining example that sits in front of me. We have Harga de facto, but we would need 100 Hargas and not one. So let us work on that, because democracy and freedom need free medias that have an impact.
I'm glad you have particularly highlighted this very important basis of democracy, which is civic society. And civic society cannot thrive without free media and their cooperation. And I saw what you have been doing, bringing journalists, professionals, experts, giving a lecture. Some journalists go to Germany, and this project is very interesting, and particularly one with the Press Institute. So I always find very stunning, very nice, very good, and I hope it will be more diversified experiences in near-term future, because democracy is kind of backsliding in many countries. Hungary, Poland, now Mongolia even trying to limit, to have a new law, kind of registering civic societies, even creating national council for civic societies, which is to be financed from the government, they say, which is already more or less confusing, like what's happening in Hungary, in Poland, which we were at least expecting to have this situation as we have now today. So all around the world, kind of that, more leftist power is coming to them. So that's the situation, whether we want or not, but this is the situation which cannot change. So now, since we have very short time, what is your next plan in personal terms, in a career?
Well, we wished to come to Mongolia 3 years ago, and we were so happy here. So it's really difficult to say goodbye. But I must say, I also, the postings are limited in any diplomatic service, and I also applied for a post in Latin America, and more in particular in Bolivia, because it offers new challenges with some similarities to Mongolia. It's a landlocked country, has many resources, mining driven, and so on. But at the same time, it's a new experience, a different cultural environment that hopefully also is inspiring for us. Elena, my wife, is Spanish, and of course the Spanish language, since she's a writer, for her is very important, and the Spanish environment will probably help her a lot also on writing. Although, if I may, I must tell you, one of the future projects is to finish a novel on Mongolia. So we
looking
hope
forward to read that.
One day to come back and maybe present it in Mongolian language
would be very happy.
And discuss it.
Would be a very good day.
So we're really looking forward to keep the ties with Mongolia and with lots of friends that we have here. At the same time, look at it from a different perspective, and maybe find new ways to appreciate these special relations that we have.
Stefan, thank you so much for your friendship, for your work you did for two countries, and particularly in between people and friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
За, хүн төлөвчтэй өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсаас Монгол улсад суух онц бөгөөд бүрэн эрхт элчин сайд Штефан Дуппел оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.